Sebastian leaned in close to his big sister, his arm around her neck as the camera recorded. Inside of their grandmother's home, Maya begins filming, explaining that police officers and so-called transport agents are converging outside, preparing to take them away in the dead of night. This was October of 2022. Sebastian was just 11 and Maya 15. They assure viewers that they're safe for now, but they're scared, and they need friends and family, anybody watching, to please come and bear witness. The video from outside films the whole thing, and a few police officers stand in the driveway, passively watching while Maya and Sebastian huddle together under the garage door, pleading with the transport agents not to take them and not to force them back with their abusive mother. One of the agents slowly creeps toward the garage, step by step, triangulating the kids and trying to block the camera. You can hear crying and sniffling as Maya appeals to their sense of humanity. "You could quit, you know," she says. "As a human being, you don't have to force children back with a child molester, but you're choosing to do that." She says they would rather go to jail than go with these transport agents. "Handcuff me, take me down to the police station, anything it takes to keep us away from our mother." They'll fight kicking and screaming, doing everything they can to avoid what is essentially a late-night legalized kidnapping. In response, the agents try soothing them, condescending to them, telling them they're just kids and don't really understand the situation. But Maya says she understands perfectly well, better than they could ever imagine. She's lived her entire life with that woman and knows exactly what she is capable of. She tells them they're abetting child abuse, and no court order in the world can justify that. Maya and Sebastian are now cornered in the back of the garage, holding each other as the transport agents close in around them. Their friends are forced out into the driveway to stand with the police officers. Phones and flashlights cast long, sharp shadows into the garage, and you can hear the witnesses crying as they watch helplessly. At one point, Maya swats at one of the agents when they try to grab her, and that's when they swoop in. One bear hugs Sebastian as he carries him out into the dark SUV waiting in the driveway. Two more pick up Maya, one by the shoulders and one by the feet, as she screams and begs them to let go of her. They try forcing her into the car, but she ends up on the ground instead, her back and head against the concrete. Witnesses narrate everything they see, like how one agent is standing on Maya's hair, and another is pulling her pants down as they're dragging her into the car. But when you have several large, trained adults against two young kids, it's only a matter of time. Eventually, Maya and Sebastian are both in the back of the SUV. Doors closed, and you can hear them screaming as police clear the way so that they can be driven off to whatever fate lies waiting. And when the witnesses continue objecting, one of the officers says it again, that shrugging nod to the final authority. "Sorry, court orders." I'm Leah Denton, and this is Psychotherapy, a show dedicated to providing survivors of therapy harm a platform to share their stories, and to offer language for those of us trying to make sense of our own experiences with the psycho in the therapist chair. This week, we're continuing our family court series with the story of Maya and Sebastian, who were forced into a traumatic reunification process with their abusive mother. Despite their desperate objections, the pleas of outside observers, and their father Justin's efforts to protect them. Justin met his ex-wife in college, and their relationship became serious fast. They married right after graduation and quickly found themselves on the fast track. Career, a home, kids. But looking back, Justin can't help but marvel at how young he was, or how many warning signs he ignored along the way.
In retrospect, there were like many red flags along the way that would have told me as a more adult perspective that having someone control your life in that way, that is a red flag. And then there were a lot of just kind of internal red flags inside myself also that were going on that in retrospect kind of line up with things that later my kids experienced with her. I had always been a very healthy, robust person. And right away after getting into that relationship in a serious way, I started having all sorts of health problems to the point where like I almost felt for a year or two at the beginning disabled in some ways. And then that was when her family and her really got on a fast track to get us married, get us to buy a house, get us on track to have kids.
Fast forward to January of 2018. Maya was 11 and Sebastian was 7. For years now, Justin had known he needed to leave. The relationship was deeply troubled, and over time he realized he had been misled in ways he hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't just unfulfilling or bad for him. It was far more damaging than that.
I came to this place that would be akin to people in a cult coming to a place of realizing that they will not survive. I realized that I would not survive if I stayed in the relationship. Intrinsically, I knew my life was at risk staying in the relationship and that I had to get out to survive and to just be a parent for my kids in any way.
On the outside, things seemed fine. Justin worked in tech and had successfully sold 2 businesses. So they were pretty well off and could afford help around the house, like babysitters and nannies. And the way Maya describes it, those people were much more present in her life than her actual mother.
Our mom was always a stay-at-home mom, but it wasn't exactly stay-at-home mom. It was more like she was there and babysitters were raising us the whole time. And then our dad was working in tech with his startups. I never really felt that sort of close connection with her, sort of, because even if she was physically there, like she wasn't really someone who I would feel like, I don't know, like what I saw with my friends where it's like, oh, they'd go running to their mom and she'd be like a comforting figure. She was more just there. A lot of the time it wasn't her there. She would be in the house, but she would be in her room because she said, I don't know if she did or she didn't, she had this excuse of having migraines where she'd be like locked in her room, like a dark contained space where no light, no noise, no anything. So that's obviously, you can't have kids with you during that. And then it was just a series of babysitters, basically.
In contrast to that, Maya has a lot of good memories with her dad and speaks of him with a great deal of affection.
He's like good at the hard talks in the car, but also like the fun. We're going to go fly drones out on a field and we're going to go surfing and stuff and all those sorts of doing things together, going out on hikes. During the year we lived in San Francisco when my mom was getting her therapy degree, he would always take us out over the hill and across the Golden Gate Bridge to go climb around the hills and see everything.
The family had moved from Washington to California right before Maya had started first grade. And by that point, Justin was fully aware that things were coming off the rails. And things may have looked great from the outside, as his wife was working to become a therapist, a marriage and family therapist, ironically. But eventually, he couldn't take it anymore, and he told her that he needed out.
We had been going to a couples therapist for a number of years, and about 4 years earlier, I had told the couples therapist that the relationship wasn't good for me. I most likely needed to get out of the relationship. As much as anything, the therapy for me was to leave the relationship. The other thing that's important here is around the same time, my ex-wife was going to school and got licensed as a therapist herself. She found this couples therapist, and I think that she found them for the purposes of trying to keep me in the relationship, and probably knew even before I told her that I was basically on my way out of the relationship. And then this couples therapist and her worked together to keep me in the relationship for this additional 4 years. And the whole entire aim of the therapy was focused on my ex-wife's problems and how basically it was set up in such a way that, and the whole relationship was set up this way, is that if all things weren't arranged for her, then that was morally wrong. The therapist kept talking about how the number one thing that kids from divorced parents have is reconciliation fantasies as adults, and they spend their whole lives dealing with wishing their parents hadn't got divorced and reconciliation fantasies. Later, when I got out of the relationship and reflected on this, I was like, this is completely insane thing to say is fact. It is not fact, and it's not even, I don't think, the majority. I think most kids, if a relationship gets to the point that it's bad enough that people are getting divorced, the kids are relieved that conflict and problems are no longer running things.
When they told the kids about the divorce, Maya felt pretty detached from the whole thing. She had her coping mechanisms and would just zone out or disappear into a book when she needed to. And for Justin, he'd been detaching himself from his wife for quite some time, well before the actual divorce. They'd essentially been living separate lives already, and as he gained more and more independence from his wife, he started noticing concrete improvements in his physical health.
I'd already internally in the relationship separated myself from her as much as possible in the years leading up to this. And really, me and the kids were living a somewhat separate life from her, even within the relationship, especially for like the 2 years leading up to me separating from her. My health and well-being had already started to improve. And I think that in a lot of ways is what gave me the strength to leave and kind of stand up for myself and say that this isn't working for me and I have to get out. Since then, all of the health problems that I thought I had, some of them had already resolved by then. At this point, I don't have any of the health problems that I thought I had then. The other thing is for my son and daughter, the problems that they thought they had, especially my son, are not there either. She had created an alternate reality in which he had a learning disability and had all of these allergies and had all of these problems. None of those problems existed in reality. And she had created them for the purposes of controlling him and me.
At first, he and his ex tried taking turns living in the house so that the kids could stay in one place with as little disruption as possible. But Justin says it was naive to think that that could ever work. So eventually they had their own place, and Maya and Sebastian started going back and forth between them. And it quickly became clear that something was very off at their mom's house.
Once we started just living at her mom's house, it was a lot. She was very reserved when we were living together as a whole family, but then when it was just her house, she was basically not there. She was like in her room and we were just watching TV all day. I think they decided that we were old enough for me to just be the grown up enough person that we could be left alone and to just watch TV. Either that, or since we were out of school, we had after school care, so we'd be there until 5 at night after school. Even though she didn't have really any reason that she couldn't have gotten us, she just chose not to. Well, her house was just not a safe place, and she was not a safe person. When she was with us, it wasn't normal parent relationship. If she was giving us attention, it was like, okay, that's the second we get attention, so I'm not going to say anything if anything's weird or anything like that. Because the moments with her were like such a rare occurrence where it's, oh, she wants to sit down and watch TV with you. Okay, this is the one time of the day where I get her to myself. I get to be around my mother.
That kind of absent parenting, letting the kids fend for themselves and watch TV for hours upon hours, was a radical and alarming departure from how they'd been raised so far. Justin says they used to be very intentional about how the kids spent their time and definitely didn't want them to be raised by screens. But when he tried bringing this up, like if they're going to watch Netflix all weekend, why don't they just stay with me? His ex would accuse him of undermining her and trying to alienate her from her kids.
When the kids started telling me about sort of just more and more concerning things came to me from the kids about what was going on there. The other thing is that when I would get the kids back, every time I got them back, they were exhausted, like dysregulated. I'd obviously not been cared for when they were at her house. Then the first real red flag came when my her showed up to my house with a device that had pornographic material on it. That began a long series of more and more disturbing discoveries about what was going on for the kids. There's no reason to believe that she, at that age, would have tried to access it herself or even know that that sort of material existed or anything like that. It seems to have showed up in such a way as to get her to start consuming that.
Maya can't go into a lot of detail about this, but she says that she and Sebastian had already been physically and sexually abused by their mother before the separation. And it got worse once their mom had her own place. At best, she and her web of significant others sometimes treated Maya more like friends than parents. But Maya already had friends. She needed a mother. And no amount of awkward fun time could help cover up how increasingly dark and sinister that house felt the rest of the time. Their mom must have sensed that the kids didn't want to be with her. If things continued down this track, it wouldn't be long before they wanted to stay with Justin full time. So she started trying to turn them against their dad, to convince them that Justin was the one who wasn't safe.
I'm not sure exactly what was going on behind the scenes with what we didn't see, but with what we did see, she started bringing it up where she was like, you could choose where you want to live, and was trying to basically say, you should stop living with your dad, stop seeing your dad. During, I think, that fall of 2020, that it started getting more heated, and I'm not sure exactly what was going on between them all the time, but it started to involve my mom's girlfriend at the time, and they started basically just talking bad about my dad. They were not doing it directly to us, but they would do it while we were sitting in the room, standing in the kitchen. They'd be talking about how he was this dangerous, bad person who we shouldn't be around and who was messing up their lives. She was in a polyamorous relationship with her girlfriend. So her girlfriend and her girlfriend's wife, and then that girlfriend's wife's girlfriend would all be around. I don't know. Yeah, I guess to each their own, but just very much didn't fit with what I know of my dad as an actual person. He's the most non-threatening man out there. He's super unconfrontational. He never wants to make anyone upset, and he'll roll over backwards to make sure that no one is upset, that no one feels bad about anything. So it just really didn't make sense to me why they would be feeling so threatened.
The initial divorce settlement had resulted in split custody 50-50, but their mom knew that wouldn't work for her. If the kids spent half their time at one house with a present and caring parent, and half the time at another house where they were neglected and abused, it wouldn't be long before they picked sides and wouldn't want to see her. So she started to escalate the situation, and it was clear a custody battle was on the way. But so far, Justin had every reason to believe that the court would act fairly and impartially. The facts and the evidence would be weighed, the law of the land would issue the right verdict, and everything would end up okay.
Anybody else who hasn't been through this, believe what society tells you, which is that there's a judge, that their job is to find out the facts and then take the morally, legally, ethically correct actions to help people through situations using the facts. Then I also believed at that time, I've been successful. I can afford to hire an attorney and pay them whatever to help make sure that me and my kids are protected in this situation. What I learned later is that actually having money and stepping into this world in this way, it's not only not what you think it is, actually there is a whole industry and system set up to use your kids and your desire to protect them to extract all of your money out of you.
If you've been listening to the last few episodes, or you've experienced anything like this yourself, then you probably know that the court system doesn't always work exactly like you think it should, to put it nicely. For all sorts of reasons, financial motivation, career favors, a fundamental lack of awareness about trauma, you name it, family court often fails to protect those who need protecting. And sometimes even actively works to make things so much worse. And Justin and his kids were about to learn this the hard way. He tried to go over and talk things through, and in response, his ex's girlfriend filed a restraining order, and drop-offs became quite complicated. They had to meet somewhere else, like the parking lot of a fire station, because the kids' mom refused to come to their dad's house. The kids were increasingly outspoken about not wanting to go stay with their mom. But in response, she would act like she had been the victim all along, and essentially started working to punish her kids for turning against her.
Well, we said we didn't want to see her. We said we wanted to get our stuff from her house. Not even that we wanted to get our stuff, we wanted to talk to her. So like New Year's Eve, we went over to her house and we'd text her and been like, we want to talk to you. We want to say what we want to say. Actually talk this out. So we had gone over to her house to be like, let's talk to you. The entire house was dark and we started calling her, and I called my grandma and I called her and I was like, we want to talk to you. Where are you? And she wasn't at her house. Apparently she had gone to a hotel with bodyguards and it was saying that she felt threatened by us coming over to talk to her. We were calling her and come over here, like get out here, talk to us, talk to your children. We want to actually see you and talk to you. And she just refused to even come see us at all. And we were outside her house for like an hour, walking around and calling and screaming at her on the phone and asking her, please just come talk to us. We want to talk to you. We were screaming and crying. We need to actually see you and talk to you. And she just refused. In the most calm, unbothered voice, was just, no, I won't. If anyone's going against her, she's not going to let them or take it or anything like that. Any sort of disagreement, she's just like, no, and shuts it all out. And it's not a possibility to have any sort of conversation where you're disagreeing with her. Yes, well, I think when I stopped going there, I didn't think I wasn't going back. I thought, oh, this is going to make her change. But then she wouldn't really even let us come back. She changed the door codes and the locks on the doors so we couldn't get in to her own house after like only a week of us not being there.
Meanwhile, Justin hoped he could still count on the court to sort everything out and keep his kids safe. He just needed to check all of the boxes. But it was starting to look increasingly convoluted. He had an attorney. His ex had an attorney. There was a custody evaluator. And by that point, the court had appointed an attorney for the kids, which in California is called a minors' counsel. And it was starting to seem less and less likely that everyone was there to work in the best interest of the kids.
The custody evaluator starts to intimidate the kids. This woman in Santa Cruz is notorious as a reunification therapist herself and also a custody evaluator that sucks families into this system. And we had no idea about any of that at the time. So I go in there, start telling her what my kids are telling me, the red flags that I've seen from my ex-wife, how she's essentially not even really caring for the kids when they're over at her house, that she's saying she's disabled, but then the kids are telling me she's only saying that to me. She's not telling that to the kids. She has completely different stories to different people. And the kids don't feel safe there. They're refusing to go there. And then the custody evaluator meets with the kids, and the kids at this point already like right away distrustful of this custody evaluator and what's going on here. And she starts to intimidate them just with outright threats, basically. And then the kids react to that by being like, well, we don't trust you. We're not coming here. We don't want to do this, which is also common. I've heard this from other families also. And I think it's done on purpose to set the stage for the next set of, quote, interventions where, okay, these kids aren't cooperating. Something is going on here. We need to intervene to make the kids cooperate. So the custody evaluator calls the minors' counsel and says, custody evaluation is going to stop and reunification therapy is going to start right now.
Much later on, Justin would do his own research and discover that this drastic step, the minors' counsel interrupting the custody evaluation and ordering reunification therapy, violated a slew of ethical rules. But you don't know what you don't know. And Justin was way in over his head. He had no choice but to go along with the court's order. The first therapist assigned by the court did not last long. Maya says it didn't go well at all. Then along came Regina Marshall, the reunification therapist who would in some ways orchestrate everything the kids had to endure over the next year. Maya says Regina seemed very understanding and reassuring at first. I hear you. I'm on your side. We'll get through this together. But early on, Regina started introducing messaging under the guise of psychoeducation about how unreliable memory can be. Like just because you remember something happening in a certain way doesn't mean that it actually happened.
Throughout, she was sort of subtly tried to poke holes in what we were saying somewhat, but in the beginning, it was mostly just her being like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and sort of on our side is what it felt like. Okay, this person might actually be helpful. But then once it got to us actually confronting our mom and talking to her, she was basically on our mom's side. She's your mom, you need to work through it. Just this sort of framing where it doesn't matter what happened, she's your mother, and you're going to have a relationship with your mother whether you want to or not. This framing of it's the worst thing in the world if you're not connected to both your parents. And I would try and explain to her, I'm like, it's not the worst thing in the world to not see a parent who's a dangerous, not safe person to be around. It's only a bad thing to not see your parent if the parent's being harmful to you. But her view is basically that if you're not connected with both your parents, then that's the worst possible situation that can never, ever happen and never be okay.
Reunification is still the North Star in most family court systems. And it sounds nice in theory, right? In a perfect world, every parent would do their best to provide a stable and loving home for their kids. And in that world, it makes sense that maintaining relationships with both mom and dad would be in the court's ultimate ideal. But to wildly understate the obvious, we do not live in a perfect world. And when a court mandates reunification without a careful accounting for the possibility of abuse, the results can be catastrophic. Maya says their mom would occasionally remind Regina that she was a therapist too. She liked using clinical jargon to solidify their alliance, like, see, I get it. You and me, we're on the same team. Early on in reunification therapy, Regina had asked Maya and Sebastian to share what they felt like were their intrinsic rights, like basic human decency and how they felt they deserved to be treated. And together they came up with what Regina called a Bill of Rights, which started to feel an awful lot like a charade when, out of the other side of her mouth, Regina would threaten a custody reversal and accuse them and their dad of not cooperating.
They'd been accusing my dad of alienation, and were ramping it up sort of against him to take us away from him and give us back to our mom, because they were saying, with how harmful our allegations were, that meant that he was too much of a harm for us to be around him, I think was sort of what was going on. And so they were ramping us basically to have us live with her 100% of the time, no contact with him, because they were saying that he was causing us to report these things.
Yeah, so this woman's getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to keep this going, and she's getting put in place, this therapist, these legal orders that make it so if we disobey her or stop going to her in any way, the kids will lose the house they want to be at and be forced back to their mother's house. Along the way, also, some disturbing things get found out. One is that the kids find a secret recording device where they had been recorded at their mother's house.
Well, we were driving around in her car, she would pick us up to bring us to the reunification therapist. And at one point, Sebastian, my little brother, ended up finding a recording device underneath one of the seats inside the car. And we figured out that it had been recording for months of our conversations, going back with everything we'd been saying. Every time we were with her, basically, there was a recording of that. She'd try to gather some sort of evidence against us or something. I don't even know. So then we brought that device with us to the reunification session, because at that point we did sort of trust the reunification therapist. We did think that she would help us and be on our side, because she had been consistently saying, you have your own Bill of Rights, you have autonomy, I'm here to help you guys, which was all a lie looking back on it. But she had been saying that, and we did at that point still kind of trust her. So we brought that recording device in, and we're like, look what our mom's been doing. This is an issue. She's been secretly recording us this entire time. And her immediate response was that we needed to get rid of it, destroy it. Why were we even upset about it? And so she quite literally had us smash it in with a hammer to destroy it.
So she essentially gets them to destroy this evidence of them being secretly recorded by their mother.
So much of this is still hard to wrap their heads around. Justin says he gets that memory can be tricky, and that sometimes a person's story might be foggy or a little confusing. But when allegations are as detailed and concrete as Maya and Sebastian's were, with specific places and descriptions of what they'd endured, nobody in their right mind, let alone a trained psychologist, would just disregard it out of hand unless they were actively avoiding a meaningful resolution. When the kids had first disclosed the abuse to Justin, he said they needed to tell Regina right away. Even then, he still had the audacity to believe that the court would do its best to protect them.
So the one important thing that happens is then, after about a year of reunification therapy and this therapist telling the kids that if they tell her what's going on, she's going to protect them, that they're not going to have to do this forever. Also telling them that their mom's behavior is bizarre, that she sees the ways in which she's lied to them in certain ways, and that her recording them secretly wasn't okay. Also, my daughter had gotten more inappropriate material from her mom and brought that to the reunification therapist. And then in the summer, the kids come to me with this, basically tell me about serious abuse and a detailed description of serious abuse. And I tell the kids, and I'm still thinking at this point, well, if the reunification therapist here's this detailed description of abuse, she's going to take action to protect the kids. So the kids tell me this, and I tell them, well, you're going to have to tell the reunification therapist what you're telling me. You can't just tell me about this. In fact, don't really tell me any more about this. Tell the professional. They describe it to her, and her reaction without skipping a beat is to gaslight the kids and tell them that this isn't real abuse and that they're confused about what happened. And it was so fast, immediate, and a well-polished maneuver that in some ways I believe that this reunification therapist had already been told about this in some way, had already devised this alternative story and just was ready for it.
When we initially left, we hadn't told anyone. It took us around half a year of not having lived with her, and we were already halfway through reunification therapy with that first therapist before we actually said anything, even to our dad. He had no idea. And so what really kicked everything into overdrive and got us into the worst of the therapy and the worst reunification therapist was when we did come forward and we did report it. When we did initially report everything to Regina Marshall, and we're like, this has been going on, she's been abusing us in this way, and we weren't feeling safe enough to tell anyone before, but now we decided to. Her immediate response, even before she told her mom, before we'd gotten off the same call with her, was, "You're lying, you don't know what you're talking about." So quickly that it felt almost like she had already been told about this, that she already knew about it and already had a response crafted of, "You're lying, you don't know what you're talking about." Either that, or she's just so entrenched in it that she's decided that kids never can report real abuse, that whenever they report it, it is not real.
I know the word gaslighting gets thrown around a lot. It's so common now, it's bound to be misused sometimes. But that's pretty much the dictionary definition, right? What you're telling me you experienced didn't really happen that way. You must be confused.
There's a review from a person who had become an adult who said that this reunification therapist told their parents to tie them up and for them, basically, in order to get them to comply. Also, this reunification therapist told me she had worked in a facility. It was a child facility, and all the kids there had been abused in various ways. And she told me that kids who have been abused always lie about abuse. She said, I worked at this facility and the kids would accuse the people working at the facility of various forms of abuse. And it was just known that kids who are abused will accuse other people of abusing them falsely.
Justin couldn't believe she wasn't taking the allegations seriously. So he checked with some other people and was told, yeah, that's abuse. You need to call the police. And so that is what he did. And the investigator he spoke with told him that if the kids came in and disclosed what he had described, that would be enough for a felony child abuse case.
He said, I want to interview the kids immediately. I want them to come to the special interview center with a child interviewer. And if they tell us what you're telling me, we're going to seek felony charges. I believe what happened then behind the scenes is the investigator contacted the reunification therapist. At this point, there was also another professional put in place called a parent coordinator who, through these threats of reversing custody, I was told if I did not agree to the parent coordinator that the custody reversal would get implemented. And so I agreed to this parent coordinator, and they now had legal authority to make decisions over the kids in certain ways. And what I found out later is this parent coordinator and the reunification therapist that ran the reunification camp had worked together many times and had essentially some sort of referral arrangement going.
The parent coordinator was a member of the Parental Alienation Study Group, which Justin describes as fanatic advocates of forced reunification, no matter how desperately children object. Almost like a fringe group made up of people who earn a living from the reunification industry. They've even tried getting parental alienation officially into the DSM to validate their work. But the American Pediatric and Psychiatric Associations have both rejected it. And, unsurprisingly, it turns out that the therapist at the reunification camp that Maya and Sebastian would eventually be sent to was part of that same group.
The reunification therapist and the parent coordinator, I believe at that time, well, I know for a fact, they intervened with the police department and the investigation and told the investigator that they were in charge of this case and had legal authority over it, and that they were handling the situation and that they were in charge of keeping these kids safe and et cetera. So what they say is they give all the signals to the police to shut this down while on the surface purporting to take it seriously. The police said, we don't see any evidence that the kids were coached. We believe that they're telling the truth, but the DA is telling us that we're not going to get felony charges out of this. They said, we believe that there's misdemeanor child abuse going on here, but it happened over a year ago and it's past the statute of limitations to press charges for misdemeanor child abuse. So they're telling the police, we've got this. Then they go into high gear and they're like, because the kids are making these allegations to the police, that is all the evidence we need to have to know that they are being alienated and need to go to a deprogramming camp, basically. And told my lawyer and told me and told everybody, these kids are going to have to go to some kind of reunification intensive camp.
Just with the police, when we did make our reports about the abuse that was going on, when we talked to them initially, they did take it very seriously. When we reported the first time, I went down there alone to talk to them and report it the first time. And after that, they had both me and my little brother Sebastian come in for forensic specialized interviews with detectives as if they were going to go take this as a real case and not just dismiss it immediately. So they were taking it very seriously. That was until Regina Marshall got involved and talked to them. And then they basically just wouldn't take our calls, would never talk to us again, and dropped the entire thing.
They tried reporting the abuse to the Minors Council as well. That's the court-appointed person who was supposed to be the kids' legal representation. But that wasn't any more helpful either.
Basically had some sort of bogus excuse if that's not possible and was trying to fully gaslight us into thinking that we could not remember what had actually happened to us. And that was the same response from the unification therapist. Your mom says it didn't happen, so it didn't happen.
All of this was enough to finally shatter the ideals Justin once believed about an orderly and just court system. It was starting to feel like there really weren't any rules. Like the people with the actual decision-making authority were just making it up as they went. But when he tried speaking out, he was told essentially, don't rock the boat. Don't try to get anybody recused, no matter how incompetent they seem. Just play along and keep showing that you're doing your part and jumping through all of their hoops.
The one thing is the lawyers will tell you, do not file complaints. They'll tell you there's no point. It'll work against you. The judge and the therapists will always be against you from that point on if you complain in any way. The other thing that's going on at this time, and something that I hear from a lot of parents, is the abusive parent, the parent that the kids are rejecting and trying to get away from, is trying to elicit these reactions from the kids, is doing everything possible to get the kids to react in these ways. Even in this situation with this reunification therapist and the kid's mom, the reunification therapist and their mother was telling them that they were acting abusively towards their mom, that they were the abusers. But to call an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and a 12-year-old or 13-year-old's behavior abusive when they are reacting to adults who are trying to use systems of power to control them is morally abhorrent.
Meanwhile, Maya kept reporting the abuse to everyone she could. Guidance counselors, school clinicians, anyone who might be able to do something. And none of it seemed to help. The court kept plowing forward with the demand for reunification.
While we're in reunification therapy, during that year, more and more descriptions of abuse and mistreatment come out from the kids to the reunification therapist. And what the reunification therapist is doing is she's playing both sides. She's playing me and the kids. If you tell me what's really going on here, if there's actual abuse going on here, if you've actually been mistreated, then just tell me. And you'll still probably have to see her in some way, but you won't have to live there. It'll be like limited contact. The kids right away at the beginning had a long list of allegations against their mom that they gave to her. Their descriptions and explanation of why they don't want to go to their mom's house and what she's done to them are getting more and more sophisticated and nuanced and detailed. So the reunification therapist keeps leading all of us down this path. She was then going to the judge and saying, these kids have been alienated against their mom. She made a recommendation to the minors council, and then the minors council repeated to the judge this recommendation that custody be reversed. If you keep getting the kids to go to reunification therapy and the kids keep complying with reunification therapy, then that reversal of custody won't actually happen. Which, if you look at the financial situation, is a legal framework which kept this reunification therapist getting paid, I think, $365 an hour for doing reunification therapy. And that is, this whole entire system is built around that tactic. That's the summary of the whole system. The whole system is parent gets accused of abuse by a child. Things are flipped to it's either the child and or the other parent who is abusive. These reunification therapists are hired for one job, and that is to basically play out this reverse abuser, keep the situation going. That is the only way to keep the money flowing in and keep these cases going. If the reunification therapist said, these kids have been mistreated, or it's detrimental to keep them in this situation for whatever reason, they should just be able to go where they want. Maybe they'll reconnect later. All money would stop. The lawyers would stop getting paid and the therapists would stop getting paid. Their financial motivation is to keep these things going. And the only way to keep that going is to do all of these weird manipulations, not weird manipulations, really malicious manipulations against the children.
At that point, we don't want to participate in this. We'd been participating in the reunification therapy and everything, but after the experience we had reporting what had happened to us, we sort of said that we don't want to do this anymore, that if they're not going to leave us on that, then there's no point in talking to them at all. So we stopped doing that. And then they were threatening our dad to make him drop us off for the required visitations. So he would drop us off and then we would sit outside of the curb for like the 8 hours that we were required to be there because we didn't want to go into her house. We didn't want to see her. And at that point, and that just kept snowballing things. And it led to a whole mess with the family court in the fall.
After Justin and the kids kept getting accused of sabotaging the process, he was eventually asked to agree to send Maya and Sebastian to an intensive reunification camp. But he refused. And when they once again threatened custody reversal and told him he wouldn't have any contact with his kids, he made it clear that this was a line in the sand moment. He believed everything the kids were saying, he could tell this whole process was harming them, and he knew mandatory reunification camp would only make things worse. So they were called back to court for one more decisive hearing.
There's this big court date planned where it was like they were basically ramping up to switch custody to give us to our mom, and we're saying that we needed to like be back in reunification and basically stop reporting what we've been reporting. I started researching. I was like, what's going on? This doesn't seem right. Is there other things that's going on? So I started researching. I started looking into what was going on in family court and why they weren't listening to me. And I found some of the other stories about reunification camps and reunification therapy and all the horror stories that had come out of that even before we had experienced it ourselves. And so I started making videos online, just on Instagram, to try and put something out there on the record of me saying what was going on and calling out some of these professionals to try and put some sort of pressure on them to make it so that they wouldn't take us away and wouldn't put us in some sort of awful camp or whatever else they had planned.
And that's where we'll have to leave things for now. But this story is far from over. I hope you'll join us again next time as we continue this episode. A heartfelt thank you to this week's guests, Justin and Maya, for sharing your stories. We look forward to having you back again next time. And as always, thank you to our writer, Bo Denton, and to our talented audio engineers at Peachtree Sound for bringing this episode to life.